In this instructional video, I'd like to show you how to use our audio-visual altimeter, ColorAlti 2. The purpose of this video is to give you pretty much all the information you need to know about how to use the device and how it interfaces with FDS Logbook, for which we've produced a separate instructional video. Before getting to how the altimeter works, I'd like to show you where the speaker is located on ColorAlti 2. Now, these devices will fit in just about any helmet, but it's important the speaker is facing the correct direction for maximum potential loudness. This is the speaker right here, and it should be facing your ear when you install it in a helmet as such. For the KISS helmet, an adapter is required that we offer in our store for $15 shipped. It's also possible to place ColorAlti behind the jumper's head in the KISS, but this has the disadvantage of making freefall alarms inaudible. So for full functionality, use the adapter in the KISS. Otherwise, ColorAlti 2 seems to fit in just about any closed or open face helmet. FlexiLight 2 is of course mostly conceived for open face helmets, but can be used with closed face as well. The sticky lights are solely for closed face helmets, as they're flexible circuit boards that adhere directly to the visor. FlexiLight 2 can be installed with or without reinforcement. A helmet like a Tonefly is so well constructed with such tight tolerances that it's pretty much unnecessary to use any reinforcement, whereas a helmet such as my trusty FX Freefly helmet did require some reinforcement to keep it firmly in place. You can see I used some heavy-duty adhesive Velcro strips, and it actually worked quite well for over 1,000 jumps with the original FlexiLight. Note that FlexiLight 2 has 4 LEDs. When installing sticky lights, you want to make absolutely sure that you're installing them in the correct location. Think of it like installing an expensive vinyl decal on a car. You don't want to mess it up. These sticky lights are lower profile than the originals, which means they're more delicate to work with. When installed properly, however, they adhere at least as well as the originals, and you can get hundreds of jumps off them. Removing and reinstalling is, however, not really feasible. We found that refurbishing sticky lights was tricky in practice with the original ColorAlti, so it's important to take the following steps to make sure you get a good installation. First of all, take the pattern supplied with the light and affix a small piece of tape to it. You'll notice we're using a 10 LED sticky light 2B. Put your helmet on, including any eyewear that you use on your skydives, and make sure to tighten the helmet down as it is in freefall. This is very important, as the helmet often shifts after tightening it. If you want to be absolutely certain, take the helmet off for a while with the pattern still on the visor and put it back on later to check again. You might try shifting the helmet around a bit too. Does the visor move much? The wind in freefall can actually press the helmet up if you are on your belly and down if you're on your head. Okay. Once you have the location where you want to install it, it's time to remove and thoroughly clean the inside of the visor. It's important to only use soap and water, preferably Dawn, to clean the visor, as you could otherwise be removing an anti-fog coating or something else. With patience, even the thickest adhesive residues can be removed with soap, water, and fingernails without damaging your visor. Cookie has a great video showing how to clean their visors. You can clean the outside of the visor too a bit, but be careful not to disturb the pattern. When you're finished cleaning, air dry the visor or very lightly pat it dry with a clean paper towel to remove any hard water spots. Using distilled water to rinse is better and avoid such spots. Once the visor is dry, take the sticky light and carefully peel off the backing, being careful not to damage the adhesive with your fingernail in the process. Line up the pattern, pressing it against the outside of the visor, and use it to line up the sticky light on the inside. If it got slightly wet, this can actually help. Once it's lined up, firmly press down on the sticky light against the visor. You can use something like a credit card afterwards to press the sticky light onto the visor. Make sure you get all around the components. One issue is that we have a curved visor and flat components on the board, so make sure to go around the large flat components and press down as such. Once the light is installed, you can connect and stow the cable using the integrated clip. Then simply plug the light into your altimeter. The routing will vary from helmet to helmet. On the Cookie G3, you can actually bring the cable through the backing into the audible pocket as such. Cookie always installs audibles low down on the chin line on the G3, so that Alti avoids this ridge right here. Okay, getting back to the altimeter itself, you can check the battery status by holding down both buttons at once. It can take up to 4 seconds to hear the beep pattern. 1 beep would indicate 10% battery life, 2 beeps 20%, 3 beeps 30%, etc. If you don't hear anything, recharge your altimeter simply by plugging it in with the supplied USB cable for about 3 to 4 hours. The red light will go off when the altimeter is finished charging. At the end, if you try again, you should hear 10 beeps. There's also a low battery warning sound and light alert that you will hear and see at 1,000 feet if your battery status has reached 10%. If your battery runs out, you don't have to worry about losing your settings or jump data, but the clock inside ColorAlti 2 will need to be reset. Simply connect to your altimeter to set the clock on ColorAlti 2. This is how ColorAlti 2's clock is set, simply by connecting to the app. So if you go to a different time zone, it will be necessary to connect to the app before you jump if you want accurate timestamps. It also doesn't know anything about daylight savings time, so it'll be necessary to set it twice per year for that. The bottom button on ColorAlti 2 is used to connect to the FDS Altis app, which is available in both the App Store for iOS or Google Play for Android. To connect, first download the app and open it. If you create an FDS logbook account, you can sign in, otherwise you can skip this step. Read the warning and the limits to liability agreement. Those steps will be reversed on Android. Now ColorAlti 2 has a rugged aluminum case, which means that the Bluetooth range is less than the original, which had an enormous range of something like 200 feet. So make sure that your altimeter is close to your mobile device when you're setting it. Press and hold the bottom button for up to 4 seconds while listening for the Bluetooth chime. Once you hear the chime, press the Connect and Sync button on the app and select your device. It'll be listed along with its 5-digit serial number. It can take between 5 to 10 seconds to download all the data from your altimeter. The blue light on ColorAlti 2 should display when you connect to your altimeter. Once data has been downloaded from the altimeter, you'll see your altimeter and its serial number, in this case 10A0J, at the top of the screen, and menu buttons. Settings at the top, data syncing in the middle, and info at the bottom. The middle button will be grayed out and unavailable if you're not signed in to FDS Logbook. Let's take a look at info at the bottom first. Very simple. You've got your serial number, battery status, the number of jumps since the flash was last reformatted in the rare case that needs to be, which occurs automatically, and your firmware number. Now let's skip to the top and see how to set ColorAlti 2. Click on Settings and you'll see 6 menu options. The main settings at the top pertain to all 5 presets. The nice thing about these presets is that they're directly selectable on the device itself, and that's what this top button does. Press and hold the button to hear what preset is currently selected, press and hold again to select the next preset, or hold down on the button to cycle through the presets until you have found the preset you want. The number of beeps indicates the current preset. Really convenient for setting the altimeter on the fly. So let's actually look at the main settings at the top. Now I'll repeat here that these main settings apply to all the presets. At the top of main settings, you need to set the number of LEDs to correspond to the number of LEDs on your light, or else the alerts will not display properly for your light. For Flexi Light 2, put 4 in here. For Sticky Light 2A, enter 3. And for Sticky Light 2B, enter 10. Below this, as with the original ColorAlti, you can change the global frequency of the alarms, making them higher or lower in pitch. This also affects the volume of the alarms, as the human ear has different sensitivity in different ranges, and the speaker used in ColorAlti 2 has a unique frequency response curve as well. Raising the audible alarm frequency on ColorAlti 2 to something like 4.3 kHz can actually increase the audibility of the alarms, but ColorAlti 2 is already very loud as it is, and most people don't need it at full volume. We only recommend having these altimeters as loud as they need to be. Okay, moving on below this, you can choose whether or not the altimeter logs jumps for syncing to FDS Logbook. If you aren't using FDS Logbook or you loan your altimeter to another jumper, you might simply turn this feature off. We've calculated with the memory in ColorAlti 2 that the average jumper could log up to 1,000 jumps before needing to sync to FDS Logbook, but we recommend syncing more often to avoid potential errors, which can be a lot harder to work out if you're logging a ton of jumps. Plus, FDS Logbook has a lot of interesting features for adding info and media to jumps as well as tagging other jumpers, so it's still good practice to log often. Okay, below this you can view the FDS Altis app in metric mode as usual, and below that you can set the altimeter to a new travel mode, which disables the altimeter from reacting to changes in altitude. It can also be used simply as a low battery mode if one is traveling through hills or by aircraft. It's important to realize that ColorAlti 2 will not function on the skydive in travel mode. I'll also point out here that there's no way to turn ColorAlti 2 off. It's an always-on design. Moving on, at the very bottom you can set your next jump number. This is good to do right when you get your altimeter, or else you'll have to shift your jump numbers after the fact in FDS Logbook, which you can do under Administration. Okay, so those are the main settings that apply to all the presets you create. As mentioned before, you can set up to 5 of these presets. Let's look at preset 1, which is the only preset with default factory settings. Click on it and you'll see 3 options: General, Sound, and Light. Let's take a look at General first. You can see here that for each preset you can change the landing zone offset. This is useful for jumpers landing at a different altitude from takeoff. If my landing area is higher than my takeoff altitude, I put a positive number in here. If If my landing area is lower, I enter a negative number. The app will confirm in words what you have indicated in order to avoid any confusion. Now, the original ColorAlti had a wingsuit mode and the ability to shut off all alerts below 1,500 feet. One of the challenges of making skydiving altimeters is identifying the various phases of a skydive. If, for example, somebody is jumping a wingsuit and swooping a small canopy, it can be difficult to tell whether they're under canopy or in freefall. To overcome this challenge, we made ColorAlti 2 more flexible in this regard. You can actually define what your freefall threshold should be considered. If you wingsuit, for example, you can put in a number like 40 miles per hour here. This would ensure that you would only see freefall alerts if you're falling at a fall rate lower than 80 miles per hour freefall threshold and only hear freefall alarms. Now you have to know your approximate fall rate in your wingsuit and enter a number lower than that here. The nice thing is, if you don't know your fall rate, you could get a very good idea of it by logging a couple jumps in FDS logbook and looking at your data. A swooper might actually increase the freefall threshold to something like 100 miles per hour in order to avoid setting off freefall alarms under an extremely high wing loading. The ability to shut off all freefall alarms and alerts below a certain altitude makes it so that you can be certain to only hear or see canopy alarms and alerts below that altitude, which can be very good for people who are wingsuiting and swooping. If I, for example, enter 2,000 feet here, then I can be certain that only canopy alarms and alerts will be heard or seen below 2,000 feet. Not that most jumpers would set freefall alarms and alerts below this, but it actually isn't a bad idea in certain circumstances for those who are required to pull lower and want to set some sort of hard deck. So those are some pretty powerful features right there for wingsuiters and swoopers. Okay, below this you can adjust the LED brightness for your ColorAlti light, which can be useful for jumping in low light conditions as not to blind oneself and others in the sky. And below that, you can set the volume for each individual phase of the skydive. There are 5 different volume levels, and the default is 4. Just a brief note on FDS terminology: we call ColorAlti 2's audible signals alarms and its visual signals alerts. Let's take a look at how its alarms are set and what type of alarms we have. But before we do that, let's take a look at the sounds themselves. ColorAlti 2 has 32 different alarm sounds, all of which can be previewed on a dedicated web page, which also shows whether the alarms are intended for freefall or canopy and ascent. Let me show you just what I mean by intended for canopy or ascent. A sound like this will not be audible in freefall under any circumstances. You need higher frequencies and a more sensitive part of human hearing to cut through the frequency masking created by the wind noise at such high speeds. A sound more like this will do. You can experiment with different sounds or volume settings if you're having difficulty hearing your alarms, or if you're getting so used to an alarm that you're having difficulty noticing it. I definitely recommend going to this webpage and looking at what's available before setting your presets for your alarms. But let's get back to the app and setting alarms. Click on Sound. Looking at the bottom, you can see 3 different tabs for the different phases of a skydive: ascent, freefall, and canopy. You can see that we have default settings already in place for ascent: an alarm at 1,500 feet and one at 12,000 feet. I can tap on them to listen to them or swipe them to delete them. On Android, you press and hold on the alarm to delete it. I'd recommend setting at least 1 alarm on the way up, and ideally more, as it lets you know that your altimeter is working and in sync with your other altimeters. It's also useful as a reminder to check gear, seatbelt, students, etc. To insert an alarm, select the sound you want by scrolling through the list of sounds. Once you have the sound you want, enter the altitude at which you want it to go off at in the text box and press Insert. You should see that alarm appear. Now for ascent, each alarm sounds for 4 seconds, which is a little bit different than the way things work for freefall and canopy. Let's take a look at how alarms are set for freefall and canopy. Basically, the main difference is that when you set alarms for freefall and canopy, you set an altitude range rather than a single altitude. This has the additional advantage of indicating to you not only when you've entered an altitude range, but also when you've exited that altitude range as well. The length of time the alarm sounds will actually then depend on your vertical descent speed, so it's important to take this into account when setting these altitude ranges. Since we fall at roughly 200 feet per second, I'd recommend a minimum range for freefall of about 500 feet, and under canopy, something like 50 feet, unless of course you only want to hear a little chirp. ColorAlti 2 can, by the way, be used with full accuracy up to 30,000 feet MSL. You can see that we have 3 alarms as defaults in freefall, from 6,000 to 5,500 feet, from 4,500 to 4,000 feet, and from 3,000 to 2,500 feet. To set a freefall alarm, find the sound you want, remembering to select a high-pitched sound you'll be able to hear in freefall. Enter the altitude range you want this alarm to sound over, and press Insert. You should see it appear in the list. If you don't, you can try again. Canopy alarms are set in the same way and they're deleted in the same way as well. You'll notice we have defaults at 1,000, 600, and 300 feet. If you insert an alarm that overlaps with other alarms, the app will automatically overwrite and adjust any other alarms to accommodate the one you entered. Okay, now let's get out of the alarms and look at alerts. Go ahead and click on Light, and you'll again see 3 tabs at the bottom. For the alerts, there is also a dedicated web page that shows every alert available. This can be useful for selecting your alerts and seeing what all is available. Alerts break down into 2 categories, plain old alerts and effects. Let me show you the difference. In a standard alert, all of the LEDs on ColorAlti 2 are the same color, regardless of what they might be doing. They could be flashing, scrolling, fading, etc. They could even be blending through the rainbow, but they're all the same color at the same time. Effects are all those alerts where the LEDs are either different colors or where they're white. Here are some examples. The nice thing is you can mix and match any alerts and effects you want, and as many as you want. I'd again stress though that since we fall at roughly 200 feet per second, that you'd at least want most alerts to last 500 feet in freefall and 50 feet under canopy. Entering an ascent alert is pretty much exactly the same as entering an alarm. You can see we've got defaults at 1,500 and 12,000 feet again, and I can click on them to preview them, or swipe left to delete, or on Android hold down. Simply find an alert or effect you want, enter the altitude, and press Insert. You should see it appear in the list as such. Freefall alerts on ascent last 4 seconds, just like alarms. You're basically setting an altitude range over which you'd like to see an alert or effect. You can see the default is from 13,000 down to 6,000 feet, blending through the colors of the rainbow over that altitude range. And then we have America at 6,000 feet all the way down to 3,000 feet, at which point it flashes red. 4 particularly unique alerts: count up, count down, fade in, and fade out are altitude dependent. This means if I do something like this, let's first take everything out. Let's set it to blend from blue to red as before, but this time let's have it count up according to altitude. Set the color first, and then the blend colors the initial color. Let's do 13,000 feet down to 3,000 feet. And this is kind of nice because then we have exactly 10,000 feet of altitude between 13,000 and 3,000 feet. We have exactly 10 LEDs on Sticky Light 2B, which means that we're going to have 1 LED corresponding to every 1,000 feet in altitude, in addition to the blending. Count down does the opposite, and fade in and fade out will fade in or out over the altitude range that you specify. This interface is so flexible, I could actually insert an alert in the middle of this count up. Let's put in white sparkle at 6,000 feet to 5,500 feet. And this is actually going to break up this count up into 2 alerts, as you can see. So go ahead and check the results by clicking through your settings. Canopy alerts function in exactly the same way. You can see we have for defaults one from 1000 to 950 in blue, and then one from 600 to 550 in green, and then from 300 to 250 in red. Pretty standard stuff. As mentioned before, you can set up to 5 presets and they can be selected with the top button. This can be done on ground and ascent. Okay, let's finally take a look at the logging capabilities of ColorAlti 2. You'll need a Wi-Fi connection to connect to FDS Logbook. Click on Data Syncing, and you'll first see your current logbook settings from FDS Logbook. These are the exact same settings that you see under Administration in FDS Logbook, and if you change the values here, they'll change in your logbook as well. We decided to make this the one thing in the logbook that could be accessed directly from the FDS Altis app, whereas everything else is pretty much decoupled, meaning that the FDS Altis app and FDS Logbook are really entirely separate systems. If you click on the Data Syncing tab at the bottom, you'll see where you can upload data to FDS Logbook. At the very top, it'll show you how many data files exist on your altimeter currently. If your altimeter is brand new, this should read 0. In my case, I have 3 jump files on there. Go ahead and press Download Files from Altimeter and the process will begin. You can cancel the process in the middle if you want without losing any data. Once the data is on your mobile device, the data is erased from your altimeter and is ready for transfer from your mobile device to FDS Logbook. You can upload files automatically individually by pressing the button next to the file, or you can do what I like to do, just press Upload All Files and sit back while they upload. You can actually see them appearing in your logbook as you do this. Sometimes it takes a few seconds before they appear. After this, you can edit your entries and add any additional information or media that you want to the jumps. As mentioned before, we have a separate instructional video on FDS Logbook, so you'll definitely want to check that out as well. This is how data from ColorAlti 2 looks in FDS Logbook. Once you're finished with the app, you actually have 3 options. You can either let Bluetooth time out automatically after 2 minutes, or you can press and hold the Bluetooth button again to turn Bluetooth mode off. Or you can press disconnect on the app and it will take care of that for you. Really user-friendly, and it avoids any possibility of anybody accidentally leaving the Bluetooth on. If you ever have any trouble with your altimeter, it doesn't seem to work, or you can't use any of the buttons or connect to it, try using the reset button located in the lower left of the altimeter. It's a good idea to check your settings after doing this, as if the file system has been corrupted, which shouldn't really happen, it will automatically be reformatted. This is also the button that's used to carry out firmware updates on the altimeter. To carry out a firmware update, plug your altimeter into your computer using a micro USB cable that can be used for data transfer. These types of cables are really everywhere because they're used for Android phones. We also sell both the charging and data cables very cheap shipped on our website. So plug your altimeter in and double-click the reset button with a paperclip. You should see a drive appear on your computer called Feather Boot. If you click on the drive, you'll see a file called current.uf2. Simply drag your new current.uf2 from a different location onto the drive, and you'll have overwritten the firmware. In terms of taking care of the altimeter, ColorAlti 2 is super robust, but it is an electronic device that can be affected by extreme weather. Leaving any electronic device in a hot car will reduce battery life, as will extreme cold. ColorAlti 2 is not waterproof, as it contains a barometric pressure sensor, and if air can get in, water can get in at a certain depth. But it was manufactured to be extremely water resistant, using water resistant hardware and a filter on the pressure sensor. So taking a quick dip in the pond or a light rain shouldn't generally be a problem, but it's best to avoid moisture. And that's pretty much all you need to know about using ColorAlti 2. Definitely check out the FDS Logbook instructional video as well if you're interested in utilizing the altimeter's powerful logging capabilities. If you have any other questions about ColorAlti 2, the best place to ask questions is our new forum at freefalldatasystems.com/forum, or you can simply contact us directly. Stay safe up there.